Man takes parking spot not noticing whose name is on it. Peter proceeded as normal, not acknowledging what he had just done. Whoever's parking spot he stole won't be too bothered, Peter thought. He couldn't have been more wrong. His brows furrowed in bewilderment as he approached his vehicle. What was this, he thought. His vehicle was as icy as a slab of ice. A frightening voice suddenly emerged from the shadows. Peter Connor lived in a lovely apartment in New York City. It was Friday morning, and Peter felt great. He got up and opened his blinds. What he saw made his jaw drop. The earth was covered in a blanket of snow. Peter had no chance to admire the beauty, as there was a big problem he had to address. Peter noticed that almost everything was buried beneath the snow. Roughly 8 inches of snow fell last night, Peter thought. He could barely see any cars. Those drivers are about to have a bad day, Peter thought, chuckling. Peter, however, did not have that problem. He was lucky enough to find a parking spot in the garage. Peter felt relieved when he saw all those cars buried in snow. Peter patiently waited for the snowplows to clear the mountains of snow that piled up in the garage driveway. He drove to work with a smile on his face. All he had to do today was attend one short meeting. His meeting wrapped up after an hour, and Peter drove home. Upon his arrival, he saw a parking space closer to his building, and there was no sign of snow in the spot. Peter contemplated for a few seconds. What he did next was a mistake that would end up costing him dearly. He took the parking slot without hesitation. He was aware that in his apartment complex, once someone spent time sweeping snow from their parking spot, it became theirs, but Peter was unbothered by that fact. He was ecstatic that he found a spot so close. Peter was tired from his meeting, and he would rather be in his warm apartment than clearing snow away. He chose the easy way out, but he was oblivious as to who that spot belonged to. Peter went about his business, as usual, unconcerned about his minor transgression. He assumed that whoever it was will deal with it. Nothing could be done about it anyways. Shortly after Peter started working away in his office and going about his day, someone else was coming at their parking spot, discovering they had been stolen of their hard work. Peter was completely unaware of the fact that the parking spot he stole belonged to his landlord. The spot's reserved sign was covered in snow, and thus, Peter could not have avoided the situation. Peter's wrongdoing intensified. Peter was busy working while his landlord lost it. He worked so hard to shovel the snow to avoid having to do it later on. He even woke up at 6 a.m. The landlord was furious. The landlord plowed the snow in sub-zero temperatures. He spent about 2 hours freeing his car and clearing a way to the road just to come back to someone stealing his spot. While Peter was getting up from his desk to get tea and stretch his legs, his landlord was plotting his retaliation. He stormed inside, snapping a photo of Peter's license plate. What he did after that was unbelievable. There was no way Peter was going to win. What was about to happen to him, he could never have predicted. His landlord started pouring water over Peter's car. He continued to do so 8 times. Moving between Peter's car and the building furiously. What on earth was he doing? Peter's car was completely frozen by the time the landlord poured the final bucket. Satisfied, he went home. Peter walked to his car the following morning. He had an important meeting with his boss, and he could not be late. When he reached his car, he gasped. What happened with his car? Peter's car was as good as a solid brick of ice. His windshield was covered in a solid sheet of ice that slid and melded with his front bumper. It looked like the ice had found its way into his entire engine. He opened his car door. There was no way he could see through this or even start the car. But he needed to fix it, and fast. He ran inside and grabbed his windscreen ice scraper. He scraped the ice piece by piece, but there were layers of it. He wondered if his engine looked this bad. He tried to open the hood, but it was sealed shut with ice. Peter immediately called his office and explained his situation to his boss. He was in big trouble. But just as he hung up, he noticed something odd. Peter was beyond stressed. He feared he could lose his career over this. He put his phone in his pocket and wondered how on earth this had happened. Then he saw him, the strange figure in the window that seemed to be looking at him. Just as Peter spotted him, he disappeared back into the building. Moments later, he reappeared. He walked out of the building. Peter immediately noticed that he was his landlord. He seemed to be unhappy to see him. Peter's wave was met with a stern look of disgust. Confused, Peter ignored him and focused his attention back on scraping the ice from his car. He was interrupted shortly after by a deep voice. To Peter's surprise, it was the cops. They informed him that he was being fined. His car registration was reported to them with an accusation of parking in a private parking spot. Peter stood frozen, quickly thinking of how he could get out of this one. "I didn't know this was a private spot," he said. "Sorry sir, the law is the law," the officer replied. In this case, the landlord's revenge is certainly a dish best served cold.